Hello, New Prospect. Welcome to RTB 2021 for January 26, 2021. Hope you're doing well. Hope you've had a great day so far. Our texts for today are Genesis 27. Then we have Esther 3, Matthew 26, and Acts 26. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and turn to, we'll start with Acts 26. So in Acts, we have Paul once again giving his defense before, in this case, King Agrippa, who is a Herodian. We have Festus there as well, who's the Roman governor. And Paul's defense here is interesting in a number of ways, but it's very similar to earlier defenses that he has given. And yet there's some differences here. So this is similar to, for instance, the defense he gives in Acts 22, and that what he does is he tells his testimony of how God had called him and how Jesus had appeared to him on the Damascus Road, and what the mission that God had given him, that Christ had given him on that Damascus Road. In fact, in Acts 26, what we have here is actually more detail on what Jesus actually said on the Damascus Road than what we have in any of the other descriptions that Paul has of that Damascus Road event. And so starting in verse 15, we have the Lord speaking, "I'm Jesus whom you're persecuting." Remember, he says, "Well, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" And then in verse 16, we have this statement of Jesus, a commissioning of Jesus, of Paul. "Get up, stand on your feet. For this purpose I've appeared to you." Skipping down to verse 17, "Rescuing you from the Jewish people, from the Gentiles, to whom I am sending you, to open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light, from the dominion of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and an inheritance among those who have been sanctified by faith in me." Now, why is Paul going into more detail here? Well, it could be something of the historical circumstances here, right? He's before Festus and Agrippa, and I think he's, through his own testimony, sharing something of the gospel to them. And I think this is instructive to us, that when we share our testimony, it should be communicating something of the gospel itself to the people that we're sharing with. In fact, Agrippa says in a short time, verse 28, "You're going to persuade me to be a Christian." And Paul says, "I hope that's the case," in verse 29. "I wish to God that you would become as I am, and that is, as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus." And the other thing I think it does here, it's not just due to the historical circumstance. I think it's also it's for the purpose of communicating something to the reader of the gospel going forth to the nations. Right? Paul is about to be sent to Rome, and this is kind of in fulfillment by proclaiming the gospel here to Festus. It's kind of in fulfillment of the gospel going from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria to the othermost parts of the earth. So that's Acts 26. We'll skip on over to Genesis 27 here. We are introduced to the character of Jacob in these patriarchal narratives as we're going forward. Once again, Isaac, a very passive character here. Jacob as this deceiver, not a very redeeming character at the very beginning. In fact, he does get better as the text goes along, especially after he is renamed as Israel. And so we have this kind of journey from Jacob, this deceiver, to Israel, this one who is receiving the promises of God. But what I think is interesting is how God uses, and this is a theme, I think, of the book of Genesis. God uses these things that are, in fact, evil for his own purposes. God is still working despite all these things. And there's that confession, even in verse 20, that it's God who's causing these things to happen. So that's Genesis 27. And then we go to Esther 3, and this is where we get kind of introduced to this is the main plot line in the book of Esther. We're introduced to the evil character Haman, who is upset because Mordecai will not bow down to him. The reason that he won't bow down is not stated, but we, of course, know as a Jew, and in fact, even I talked about this, I believe, when I was preaching on Exodus 20, verse 3, that one of the things that defined a Jewish believer is that they, as a monotheist, didn't just not believe in many gods, they believed in one God intellectually, but they would not worship other gods. That's what monotheism was truly about, was that they would not worship anything else other than God. They would not have any other gods before him. And so here's Mordecai is refusing to give that kind of deference and worship to anyone else except God himself, although it's unstated in the text. But of course, Haman responds by not just, everything is kind of blown out of proportion in the book of Esther. And he responds by not just wanting to kill off Mordecai, but he wants to kill off the entirety of the Jews. And to do so, he figures out the date for this genocide of the Jews by casting lots. And this is, of course, in Hebrews, the pure, and casting the Purim. And Esther becomes the feast of the story that is the basis of the Jewish festival of Purim. In fact, this regular Jewish festival of Purim is the only festival commended outside of the Pentateuch. So all the rest of the regular Jewish festivals, like the Passover, like Yom Kippur, you find in the Pentateuch, the Feast of Booths, the Feast of Tabernacles. And Purim is the only one that doesn't have that, or that isn't commended there. So anyway, we have this, the plot kind of setting up for kind of the climax of the narrative that we'll find in the next chapter. And then finally in Matthew, we have, of course, the narrative of Jesus's arrest, betrayal, the last Passover, of course, and his time in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Peter's denials. So lots of action here in Matthew 26. Much of it we're familiar with. Let me just draw your attention just briefly to the Passover. Remember what the Passover was all about. The Passover for the Jew was a celebration of God's gracious redemption of his people, his deliverance of his people in the Exodus. And it was a time of not just remembrance, but also a time of rededication. And so when Jesus is a rededication to the covenant God who had redeemed them. So when Jesus celebrates this Passover with his disciples, it institutes the Lord's Supper. He institutes an ordinance of what would become the church that is also a time of remembrance and rededication and looking forward, even as the Passover was for Judaism. And if you notice, many times when we celebrate the Lord's Supper as a church, I mentioned that fact that and I think it's helpful because it shows what the Lord's Supper means to us as a people of God, that we gather not just as individuals, but as a people of God to remember what God did for us in Jesus to redeem us from our slavery to sin. We also gather as a people of God to recommit ourselves to him as our covenant Lord. And we also are looking forward to the day when we will one day celebrate it with him once again. So that's something good, by the way, I think, to do not just at the Lord's Supper, but to do every day, to remember what Christ did for us as a people and to anticipate what he's going to do in the future. So I hope this has been an encouragement to you on this day, January 26, 2021. Hope you have a great rest of the day.